just maybe 2 minutes on the biolab thing, because the biolab just was so bizarre, right? Russia captures some things and they say, listen, we think we have documents proving that the US was working on biological weapons targeting Slavs, experimenting on Ukraine, like some just bizarre stuff, hard to believe.
No, I believe every single word of it.
And then they ask Nuland, and Nuland says something like, no, we don't have, though. Ukraine doesn't have that, but God forbid if it falls into the Russian hands. So it's like, wait, but what are you afraid of? If
but it's not even Nuland. Before the war started, the American who was, first of all, it's not a question. We had biolabs in Ukraine. It's unclassified. We have documents. We brag about it. It's part of the Cooperative Threat Reduction Agency program to go in there and provide an employment mechanism for Ukrainian biologists so they don't take their weapons of mass destruction skills elsewhere. And then it became a vehicle of doing advanced experimentation, maybe in a atmosphere that was less restrictive than what you would get in the United States. And I will say this, every document the Russians have that I've looked at is 100% accurate. Their interpretation of those documents might not be that, but
a little pessimistic, or
they might be reading more into something than actually was. But the bottom line is we were doing some things that were unsavory, unethical, and frankly speaking, illegal from a weapons of mass destruction management standpoint. We are signatories to the Biological Toxin and Weapons Convention, and we are in violation of that straight up by our own admission. That's what shocked me when the director of this program was saying, well, the thing that worries me the most is that the Russians might bomb one of these facilities and take out the power to the refrigeration and then crack the containment. And so as these things thaw, they could be released, and we might have some of the old Soviet pathogens be released. And I'm like, wait a minute. They're not supposed to be any Soviet pathogens. They were all supposed to be destroyed. You took control of this facility. The treaty obligates you not to receive or retain these kind of things. They should have been destroyed. We're coming on 17 years into this program, and you're telling me it's still there.
Oh,
why?
That reminds me. I also don't want to neglect the fact that there was the Zaporizhia nuclear plant, which was
being shelled on a daily basis by the Ukrainians. Deliberately so.
Yeah.
So the Ukrainians, they don't get a pass, and neither do the United States. And this all factors in. Remember at the beginning I was talking about there's two ways to calculate casualties. One is to evaluate the consistency of the argument. Yeah. The Russians have been consistent from day one. Russians are not very good at information warfare, meaning they're not good propagandists who sell what they're doing. They just do it. Whereas we're spinning all the time. We're like hamsters in a wheel, just spinning, trying to explain away stuff, deny, admit, deny, admit. And it colors your impression. But so Putin now is able to mobilize 300,000 reservists. Now, what was interesting about that is, depending on whose figures used, maybe upwards of 200,000 Russians fled. Russian men fled. But notice that the Russians didn't close their borders.
Yeah.
The Russians didn't try to stop them. The Russians went, "До свидания," leave. Because the people who fled were basically the constituency of Russian oppositionists like Navalny. In fact, many of them who fled as part of a Navalny-driven propaganda campaign where they fled and then they would start speaking to the media, telling the same story, trying to spin things to influence what's going on back in Russia. But back in Russia, you have the rest of the population very stoically saying, we got to do this. Oh, you're calling me up? I don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it. I show up, I'm going to get trained. And I liken what has happened to Russia to something that I read about in Rick Atkinson's wonderful trilogy about the U.S. Army in World War II. It starts off with the North Africa campaign. Second volume is about Sicily and Italy. Third volume is about Europe. But by the time you get to the end of the second volume, you see this conscript military, these draftees in the United States who didn't want to be there. I mean, everybody's talking about Pearl Harbor effect sign. These guys didn't want to be there. They wanted to be home. They were drafted. but there's this growing recognition that war is a nasty business, and the only way you're going to get home is by killing the enemy and ending the war. And so these draftees became hardened killers and who were committed to the awful task of war. And I look at these 300,000 and I look at them coming in and I'm like, they don't get to go home until the war is over. Mm-hmm. And they want to be home. And they also believe in the mission. They understand this is an existential conflict where the NATO is trying to kill them. And these guys are going to do the job. Mm-hmm. They're going to do the hard job. They're going to die. They're going to be wounded, but they're going to kill the Ukrainians, and they're not going to stop killing them until this job is done. And that's where we are today.
And unfortunately, the Ukrainians have the same mentality, right? I mean,
they do, but they're running out of guys with that mentality.
Well, this is I believe Moon of Alabama said something like Russia has already destroyed the Ukrainian army twice and is in the process of destroying the third
time.
version. Yeah,
I agree. Look, now we come to the question of, how do we count casualties? And the one way, again, is the consistency of argument. And I think I've made the case that I feel that the Russians are far more consistent in their entire approach to talking about this war. They've been honest. There's consistency in the argument, et cetera. And we can see distinctive phases. Whereas the Ukrainians from day one have been just trying to sell us the Brooklyn Bridge. They're like a used car salesman trying to impress me with shiny chrome and all that, but the engine don't work. But that's okay. Now I pull into the professional side. You see, again, I'm not bragging, but I had some pretty relevant experiences in my life. And one of the most relevant took place between October and December of 1990, when I was assigned to the Warfighting Center at Quantico, Virginia, to the War Gaming Division. And they had this Janus computer. And, it's been upgraded since then, but back then it was a sort of a supercomputer that was designed to do war games. So my job was to identify weaknesses in the Iraqi defenses that could be exploited by the Marines. And so I got the photographs from the CIA. I built on the computer an exact replica of the layout of the Iraqi defensive positions, and then we occupied it with the Iraqi units. Each piece of equipment, each squad, the weapons they had. I did an analysis of the logistical sustainability, where their ammo was, how they would get it. I got into doctrinal employment of troops, which troops had combat experience against Iran, et cetera. And I spent a lot of time programming this. And then I built the Marine units based on unit histories, unit composition, et cetera. Did the same thing. Very detailed calculations going into this. And then you line it up, you give them the direction of advance, you give them, their orders, and then you hit play, and then you watch it play out, boom, 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 boom. And I have to tell you, the first couple of times I hit play, the Marines got wiped out. And we're just sitting there going, that ain't right. Why? So now you have to go down and break all the numbers down. Oh, we gave the Iranians or the Iraqis far too much PK, probability of kill, for their artillery. Let's adjust that to reality. We gave them too high of a rate of fire. They're not that well trained. Adjust that. We didn't give our counter battery fires sufficient lethality. Adjust that. We start adjusting the numbers to get it down. Suddenly we hit this fine point where we hit play. The battle unfolds the way it should. Because there's other times where the Marines just cut through them like that. And we're going, that ain't right either. What's going on? We gave the Marines too much capability, all that stuff. So we find the balance, and then we play this over and over again throughout the line. And I became very good at rapidly assessing combat capability of units in specific terrain and lethality of effect. And here's the thing. What I predicted would occur, because I wrote this up and it was sent to the Marines. What I predicted would occur is exactly what occurred. Exactly what occurred.
So are you doing that? Like, are there Russians and Ukrainians and Americans doing that right now? Like constantly adjusting it to what they're seeing with data? And is that
any professional staff would do this?
Yeah. So that's,
and the Russians have a very good staff. I know the United States is war gaming this out constantly in Germany, back in the United States, using the updated Janus computers, which are even faster and better than the ones I use. But my point is,
so you're suggesting the Ukrainian military is not entirely independent of U.S. command and control?
the Ukrainian, I mean,
that
it's
was a
sovereign,
facetious question.
it's a sovereign state with a sovereign military. But I would say that the Ukrainians know that if they deviate from the directions given to them by the Americans, then the outcome will probably be bad. And if they,
so you're even just on the basis of trusting the Americans to know better militarily, maybe, or just have better capacities to do this kind of work.
well, they have better technology.
Yeah.
And they're uninterrupted by Russian artillery fire, right. Russian aerial attacks, no electrical outages. They have.
But like, if we hear, for example, that it's Zelensky specifically who's refusing to order a retreat from Bakhmut.
No, that's probably accurate. That's probably accurate. The Americans are probably saying you might want to get out of there now, or else you're going to lose these guys. Mm-hmm. And Zelensky is saying, well, if I pull out, then, or the Americans might be saying, you can't pull out because that'll create this morale issue, and you have to sit there and fight, because if morale collapses, then we're going to have a hard time getting Congress to cough up more money. So, I'm not privy to the conversation, but I would say that there's give and take there, where both sides are constantly talking to one another. But my point is, when I look at the battlefield, my brain automatically goes back. It's like anything. If you I don't know, did you play sports?
Actually, martial arts.
Okay, martial arts. This is even better. Conditioned response.
Yeah.
Conditioned response. So that you're actually doing something before you actually think about it, because it's conditioned response.
Yeah.
And that happens in combat especially. You have to be. That's why it's repetitive training, because. And that's why people are yelling at you. That's why you're making noise. That's why it's sleep deprivation, because you have to train like you're going to fight, and your body has to be conditioned to have conditioned response, repetitive motion, so that when boom, 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 people die, blood, screaming, everything, your body's still going to do what it was trained to do. It won't have time to go into shock and think. Well, my brain, unfortunately, has been programmed to look at every combat situation as if it's a giant Janus simulation. And so I just sit there and look, and I'm running the numbers. And believe me, after doing it for 3 solid months, it's repetitive. My brain's conditioned. I know what factors I'm looking for. And, I'm automatically searching out logistical sustainability, command and control. I'm looking at the terrain. I'm looking at the artillery. I'm looking at the weather, because the ground soil conditions impact, what's going to happen. I'm looking at doctrine. Is it going to be, a DP? Or is it going to be airburst, or is it going to be a mix of the two? And you do this, and then you go boom, and suddenly I'm coming out going, the Russians are going to get 8-1 casualty advantage here. Mm-hmm. And so now we look at this, at the mass of fires being brought in, and you start calculating probability of kill based upon density of troop and all that stuff, and you're going, wow, they're going to sustain 60% casualties over this period of time. So you look at the number of troops on the front line, and it's a battalion, and you say, in 2 days, that battalion is going to suffer a 60% casualty rate. That's 500 people. That means 300 and some odd casualties. And now you replicate that across the battlefield, getting the reports of where the battles are going, and the numbers just start adding up. And and then you take a look at what the Ukrainians can do to the Russians. And that's why anybody's sitting there go, the Russians have suffered 180,000 dead. How? You tell me how that happened. Because I'm running the numbers, I'm looking at it, the thing, and it ain't going to happen. Not on your best day. You could give the Ukrainians 100%, lethality of every round they fired. They're still not going to kill 180,000 Russians. It just doesn't work that way. And then the other thing you have to factor in is the whole. And I have an advantage here because I was in field artillery, and I would actually help train the Marines early on. My battalion took the lead in adapting tactics designed to defeat a Soviet enemy. Other than that, we used to fight, when I came in, we were fighting World War II type artillery battles, and we would all die because the Russians have far more artillery. So we were doing shoot, move, communicate, counter battery war. And so I'm sitting there looking at the artillery war, doing, running the counter battery. I helped perfect early counter battery radar employment.
So wait, so are you saying that Americans, and therefore presumably Ukrainians, have a little bit of specific knowledge of how to fight artillery battle from a disadvantage, like on the assumption that the Russians are going to have more artillery?
Yes.
Yes, that's interesting.
No, that's how I trained. Disadvantage. But here's the difference. I operated in a maneuver warfare environment,
right,
where we could use space and maneuver to our advantage to prevent the Russians or the Soviets from acquiring a situational dominance. Because if we stayed in one place too long, then they were going to come in with artillery that would just wipe us out. So we're moving. The difference here is this is positional warfare,
right,
which locks the both sides into, disadvantages from, survivability standpoint. For the Ukrainians to be able to put fire on the Russians, they have to bring their systems into range to hit the Russians. And if you can shoot the Russians, they can shoot you. There is no range advantage. Everybody's going the HIMARS out. The Russians have things that outrange the HIMARS. And then the other thing that I developed was, I'm literally, again, I'm the guy who first started using Pioneer drones to adjust artillery. Back in 1986, 1987, nobody did that. The Israelis were working on it, but for the United States Marine Corps, for the U.S. military, I'm the guy that helped create, how to integrate drones in this. So I have a little bit of knowledge on how this stuff works theoretically. And so I'm looking at how drones are being applied to the battlefield, et cetera. And the point I'm trying to make is when I come up with a number, it's not pulled out of thin air. It's a number that's actually derived from me spending a couple hours closing my eyes and running the battlefield through my head, looking at maps, looking at organizational structures, trying to find unit histories, and then applying all of that in a comprehensive fashion. Is it perfect? Hell no. This ain't a Janus computer. This is a human brain. That's to a 61-year-old man who drinks a lot of Diet Coke to stay awake. So dogs barking, I got people knocking at the door, I got work I got to do. So it's not perfect. I'm not pretending that it's flawless, but I'm telling you this. I believe my numbers, and it's turning out my numbers are actually very accurate, because the more we're learning about casualty levels and stuff, I think there's we don't see from a propaganda standpoint, you get a wide divergence, but when you get to the serious people about numbers, the numbers are starting to gravitate to where I said they were going to be.
So two questions arise. One is, assuming Russia's in the process, if Moon of Alabama is correct and Russia's in the process of destroying the third version, the third iteration, is there a fourth? Does NATO have the ability to build a fourth Ukrainian army?
Well, the answer to that is yes and no.
Okay.
Right now, there's anywhere from, I think, probably 40,000 Ukrainian troops that are undergoing training in one form or another out there. They might be able to surge that number up to 70,000 total. That's a significant number of troops.
But that's less than they've already lost.
Oh, it's not enough. The burn rate is higher than the replenishment rate. That's the other basic reality of military math. Your combat effectiveness drops significantly as your numbers go down, because you can't do things you were supposed to do. And if you can't replace the numbers, then your combat, and the lower it drops, the higher casualty rate you're going to have. You're going to burn through a lot of people more quickly.
The reason that the maneuver war hasn't happened, that Russia hasn't done it or been able to do it, is presumably partly because of the incredible fortification of an entrenchment of the Ukrainian military. Is there a way that they could use that advantage to keep it going? Because for me, it's like, a lot of these wars take years. Like it's a rare war that takes a year or less to be over. I mean, Georgia was fast, but like the Chechnya wars or Afghanistan, Iraq, these all took a long time.
Well, I don't think this war is going to last beyond late summer, early fall. Because
so another year, maybe.
No, another
half a year,
6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
Because, well, I'll let Jan Stoltenberg speak for me. Ukraine's going to run out of 155 millimeter artillery. There was a Russian officer who spoke of in Bakhmut, they're capturing the Ukrainian command posts. And so what they're getting is the Ukrainian documentation on ammunition allotment. So if it's a command post with artillery units dedicated, it's the reorder. And on the Soviet stuff, the 122, the 152, it's all nothing. They're getting nothing because they have nothing. They've run out. on the 155 millimeter, actually what he said is they're getting a lot more than we thought they were getting, that the Ukrainians are actually firing more rounds than we thought because they have to match the intensity of the Russian fighting, the Russian firepower. But the point is that expenditure rate is beyond that which NATO can sustain. NATO's already, we talked earlier about defense industry. Russia's defense industry is up and running. It's kicking out enough ammunition to support this war and the expansion of the Russian military. NATO has not upped its game on defense industry. It takes time to do that. It takes money, it takes resources, it takes planning, none of which has happened. They're only starting the initial phases of that now. But again, it's also a matter of scope and scale. Many private industries are not going to spend the money necessary to gin up a production line if all you're going to do is produce X. They're going to say, in order for this to be profitable to me, I need X times 20. And nobody's sitting there saying, well, we're going to go ahead and commit to that because they don't know how long this war is going to last. So there's no ammunition being built, in sufficient quantities. So the Ukrainians are burning up in a week and a half, a month's worth of ammunition production. That's unsustainable. Even if you have 1 million rounds in reserve, which we had at one point, those are gone. We've given them all Ukrainians. They fired them. We can't produce anymore. There's nothing left. They run out of ammunition this summer, and there's nothing that can happen to change that equation. And when you run out of artillery ammunition in a war dominated by artillery, you lose. So that's why I believe, one, the Russians don't need to go maneuver warfare on us. I bring this up. Maneuver warfare looks cool on maps, and it's nice in Hollywood because everything's perfect in Hollywood. It always works. But read history. First of all, read the maneuver warfare battles that took place in 1943 around Kharkov with the back and forth, and look at the casualties, extraordinarily high casualties. And then take a look at, for instance, in the summer of 1944, Operation Bagration, which turned into the destruction of Army Group Center. And if you look at the maps, it's like big Soviet arrows, and you're like, wow. And you look at the German casualties, like, oh, they swamped them. That's why they collapsed. They're retreating. I say, yeah, but now look at the Soviet casualties. Huge. And you're going, holy cow, they lost 1 million dead? Yep. Big arrow warfare.
In winning, while they were winning.
In winning. That's right. Against an enemy that was collapsing and retreating. So, the Russians don't want that. They don't want that. What they want is to destroy the Ukrainian military. And right now, they have a systemic approach, a very, there's an M word out there, methodological, I don't know. They have a methodology. I'm a Marine. Don't expect me to speak the English language properly. But they have a methodology, there's the word, that they use, and it's working. And the other thing people are saying, when does the offensive begin? I'm like, it's already begun.
Yeah.
It's not just
because they're expecting, I've seen Colonel.
Well, they want the big
McGregor.
arrows.
Yeah.
But the point is, all along the front, the Russians are attacking from Zaporizhia up to Limon, and even hooking around that. And they're succeeding. Some of the offensives up north are taking 5 to 7 kilometers a day in territory. The Ukrainians, meanwhile, are they're like a fire brigade running around to different fires. Eventually, you run out of firefighters, you run out of engines, you run out of hose, you run out of water. Yeah. And that's what's happening. And this is before the Russians bring all of their forces that are still training, by the way, in deep breakout operations. They haven't even arrived at the battlefield yet. So when they arrive, the Russians are shaping the battlefield to their advantage. They're identifying the weak points in the Ukrainian lines, and they will exploit those. I am very confident that the Ukrainian army cannot sustain the casualties that they are sustaining. I'm very confident that NATO can't replenish the Ukrainian army in a sufficient fashion to keep it combat effective on the totality of the front, and that the Russians are going to be able to sustain this military operation. The Ukrainians run out of ammunition sometime in July, August, and it's over.
So I don't think that, unfortunately, the official Ukrainian spokespeople don't agree with the anti-war position, which is like, the way I feel about all this is that the Ukrainians are suffering much worse than anyone else from this whole thing. And I would love if this war could end before there's further destruction of their country. And I I mean, to the, you know, and that also gets us to the question of like an anti-war movement. And, you know, you've been talking about the anti-war rally and, you know, the left right unite against war, which I don't really believe that's a possible thing to do. But, you know, what this all seems very, very distant from what an anti-war movement can actually take on. It also seems like the anti-war movement, such as it is in the worst state I've seen it in probably 20 years, in the sense that so many anti-war people are effectively pro-war here. And so like actually anti-war people are very rare. And very far between, and they're instantly attacked as being Putin apologists and so on.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know, like, do you have you I know you were invited to the rally and uninvited to the rally and re-invited to the rally and made a speech for the rally. So, you know, I think there's going to be another what I would consider to be a more authentically anti-war rally coming up in March, I think on the anniversary.
March 18th, I think it is there. Yeah.
But like, what do you think, you know, what do you think we, like, anti-war people should be focusing on for the coming year?
Well, let me put my, first of all, I have to, you know, I think you have to be honest about your biases. And I am strongly biased against the anti-war movement in America today because of my experience with Iraq. I find them hypocritical in the extreme. I find them to have been embracing an anti-war posture when the president's name was Bush, but when the president was renamed Obama, they disappeared overnight.
He single-handedly.
And I'm just like, you guys stand for nothing.
Right.
And they do. They stand for absolutely nothing. I know there's some principled people out there, and there's little kernels of hope, of genuine people, but a movement. There is no anti-war movement in America today. And here's my thing about March 18th. And I've got good friends who are organizing this, and they're going to be there. And I hope they take what I'm about to say in the way I mean it, because I want them to succeed. But I remember they sat there and they mocked the fact that the Rage Against the War Machine only attracted 3,000 people. Yeah. They're like, that's nothing. Well, I want to remind them that they only planned on having 2,000 people show up. That the purpose of this rally wasn't to attract numbers, it was to create an organization that brought divergent points of view together in a singular focus. And while that wasn't perfect, and my experience in it is a little bit bitter, but I'm bigger than that. This ain't the Scott Ritter movement. This is an anti-war movement. And there is potential there if they can get their act together, and that's a big if. I'm not giving them an automatic, that the next time they get together, they might have 10,000. And if they can get their act together, they can turn that to 20,000, 100,000, 1 million. This has potential to achieve those numbers. March 18th, they're talking about 6,000 people. That's the number, that's their number. That's as big as they're ever going to get because they aren't capable of organizing beyond that. That's the maximum potential of the left anti-war movement. 6,000, 8,000, 10,000, they can't go beyond that because they've self-limited in terms of their purity tests and all this other stuff. Plus, they don't know what they're anti-war about. Are you anti-war or are you anti-suffering? Because here's my point about anti-war. First of all, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I'm not anti-war. You want to hurt my country? I will kill you with a smile on my face. I will come at you like Attila the Hun, man. I'm a Marine. I'm trained to kill. I'm old now and my knees don't work and my eyes don't work. And so my mouth is the only thing that works. But when I was younger, I'd have been right there urging them going forward. I'm not anti-war. There's a tweet that got me in a lot of trouble, but I'm not retreating from this tweet. Anybody listening to this who has, indicated the dissatisfaction, I don't care because I believe in this tweet. And it was when I was criticized by the Libertarian Party as, you're not anti-war. Well, first of all, where were you in 2002, 2003? I know where I was. I was demonstrating, I was organizing, and I wasn't just out there demonstrating. I was doing stuff like putting my life on the line to go make a documentary film about the truth of weapons of mass destruction, having the FBI come at me like you've never had the FBI come at you before. I'm the guy who went to Iraq in September 2002 and spoke to the Iraqi parliament. No one has ever done that before. I broke all the rules in going over there, and I got the Iraqi government to do that which no one thought possible, which is to invite UN weapons inspectors back in. And that was the only way you were going to stop a war, was to get UN inspectors back in to show that there was no WMD threat. And when that failed, I was the guy that got Saddam Hussein, and no one, I don't think many people know this. I got Saddam Hussein to buy into 6 points of peace that would lead to regime change. Not that he would leave, but the change in behavior. He agreed to this on the eve of war. And if it weren't for the FBI and some other idiots like the libertarians, I'm not blaming them, that mindset, who decided they wanted to destroy me and not give peace a chance, we could have stopped this war, or at least we would have had a fighting chance. So anybody who wants to tell me I'm not anti-war, tell you, I'll meet you in the boxing ring and I'll show you my anti-war technique played out in Morse code on your face. I'm not a peaceful man, but I hate war with a passion. And I wanted to stop that war, and that war broke my spirit, broke my soul, crushed me. I'm just being straight up honest. And the anti-war movement is one of the reasons, because they let me down. They let themselves down. They let the American people down. They let the Iraqi people down. They let the world down. So now people are like, God, what do you believe about Ukraine? Well, let me tell you what I believe about Ukraine. I believe this war should never have been fought.
Yeah.
I would have preferred an outcome, but I can't. See, I'm somebody who says, from an American perspective, that we can't go to war unless we've exhausted every option short of war. There's no door to a peaceful resolution that has been opened and walked through, that we have tried everything before we take that down. And that war, even then, has to be worth the sacrifice we're asking of the men and women who are going to shed their blood on that battlefield. And so I'm sitting there putting myself in Putin's shoes saying, what more could he have done?
Yeah.
He spent 8 years begging for Minsk to be implemented. Right. And it turns out that nobody was serious. He was the only serious player there.
Which again, they admitted, and Merkel admitted.
Hollande admitted, Poroshenko admitted it. You know, and Putin has said that was one of the greatest mistakes he's ever made, was believing them. He said, we could have ended all of this in 2014 had I just been a little bit more bloodthirsty. But I believed in peace. I believed they wanted peace. I tried to get peace. The draft treaties they put out there, Russia basically said, here's what we need to stop a war. They wouldn't do it. Then Russia carried out a phase 1 operation that cost them a lot of guys because they didn't go to war. They sought to, instead of destroy, to compel to the peace table, and they put it all on the line to achieve that objective, and they were betrayed by the West. So I think,
Ukraine also assassinated their own negotiators.
Their own negotiator and all that. You know, so. But my point is, I can't think of anything more Putin could have done given the circumstances. So now we're at war. Didn't want it, but we're there. So what's the objective now? I know Putin has strategic objectives. I know Ukraine has.
For us, right?
But for us, what's our objective? It has to be to minimize the suffering.
Yeah.
Once war has become a reality that we can't hit the reverse on, it's there in front of us right now. They're fighting. What do we do as an anti-war movement? You can't say, well, I'm anti-war, therefore I can't do anything that legitimizes this conflict. Dude, it's happening. Yeah. You can't change that. It's done. They're at war. So if you're going to say, well, I'm anti-war, therefore I'm anti-Putin, why? He did everything possible to stop the war. They didn't. They wanted it. What do you need to do to minimize the suffering of people? If you're anti-war, you have to care about the Ukrainian. Let me put it to you this way. At this stage in the game, it's possible that Ukraine has suffered 350,000 plus military dead, probably another 400 to 500,000 wounded. Many of those wounded's brains no longer work. They don't have limbs. They'll be pissing into a bag the rest of their life. All the things we don't like to talk about when, Americans, I support the troops. Really? When was the last time you went to a VA hospital and changed out the colostomy bag of a 32-year-old man who will never walk again because he went to war for your country, the one that you said you wanted to stop, but you didn't stop? I have no patience for these people. So now the Ukrainians are suffering. Tens of millions of Ukrainians have been displaced from their homes. Their homes have been destroyed. Have you looked at the cities where they're fighting right now and the destruction, the level of destruction? Even if the war ends today, they can't go home because there is no home. They are permanently displaced. Now imagine Do you have kids? I'm not asking too personal questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I have kids. I've raised kids. Thank God I had a stable house, income, etc. So my kids grew up with a sense of normalcy, education, social adaptation, all that stuff. They're pretty cool kids. But imagine now, house catches on fire. That happens, but there's no Red Cross, no nothing. As I go to the street, the neighbors are coming in and hit me with sticks, driving me away into the woods. I have to go live in a country that doesn't want me, get a job that I'm not. It's not what I'm trained to do. I have to go, shovel poop. And my kids are in a strange school system, and their relatives are dying. They can't go home. Those aren't going to be well-adapted kids. We have condemned a generation of Ukrainian children to a horror, to a maladjusted life. Some of them may be lucky enough to get on the right track, but they're going to be forever scarred by this experience. If you are anti-war, you have to be against this happening. And this is happening because we have sustained this conflict 3 times over. This war should have been over early. It could have been over on April 1st. He stopped it. This war could have been over in the summer of 2022 because the Russians were destroying the Ukrainian army. We reinforced. And now we continue to keep this war going by pouring military forces, resources, and financial resources, and we don't give a damn about the people of Ukraine. We can't give a damn when you allow that many Ukrainian soldiers to die in 1 year. We can't give a damn when we allow over $1 trillion worth of infrastructure damage that will never be repaired by us. We can't give a damn when we've displaced tens of millions of refugees in their own country and out of their country. Don't tell me we care about the Iraqi or the Ukrainian people. We don't care about the Iraqi people either. We don't care about anybody. This isn't a war fought for a cause. This is a war fought to hurt Russia. Now we come to the Russians, okay, because we've talked about the Ukrainians. The Russians have lost potentially some 45,000 men. In the decade that America was in Vietnam, we lost 58,000 men. If this war goes on at the intensity I expect, Russia will match that number or exceed that number by the end of the year. All right, so in a 1.5-year time period, Russia will have suffered casualties equivalent to what we lost in Vietnam, and Vietnam broke the soul of a nation. Okay, then there's the wounded out there. And again, guys, wounded doesn't mean you got a hole in your body and you walk around, you show the girls the scar and you're cool. Wounded means you're screwed up for life.
Artillery war.
Artillery, well, if you take a bullet, a high velocity round hits you in the head and you live, your brain is gone. It hits you here, you lose your arm. You're going to, like I said, the internal damage to the body, the spinal injuries, etc. There are tens of thousands of Russians, just like the Ukrainians, who will not walk again, who are going to be in wheelchairs, who aren't going to be able to support their families and all that. And then there are the Russian children who watch their father die or their father get crippled. There are the Russian wives who will never be the same. Russian society that's been torn asunder. So this is a two-way street. The sword of war cuts both ways. It's cutting both sides horrifically. And we care. We say we care about humanity. We care about people. I was going to use a bad word. If you're anti-war, and you say, I support the continuation of this war, what about the Russian people? Don't tell me you're anti-war if you're willing to have them suffer and pretend that you don't want the Ukrainian people to suffer. So there is no anti-war movement right now. The quickest way to bring this nightmare to an end is to bring it to an end. And unfortunately, the only way it's going to end right now is with a decisive Russian military victory. So I'm going to be frank. If you pretend to be anti-war, then you have to support the quickest possible Russian victory in Ukraine, because that'll be the fastest way to stop the death and suffering, because otherwise you're going to buy into a system where we continue to fuel this fire, and that fire will burn as many people as possible.
There is one other important point to add to that. I mentioned that I was going to talk to you about this before we started recording, which is, I can't help but be concerned about what happens to Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the event of a Ukrainian victory.
Yeah, right. What are we asking for by saying Ukraine wins?
Yeah. So, on the one hand, it's like, the pro, I don't know, I would call them pro-war people who say, we want Ukraine to get Crimea back and get all of their territories back, and that's a victory. But if that happens, what is their plan? What is their plan for the people that are from there and that live there, that they've been at war with? What happens if those people are defeated and they are there? Like, is the idea that they're just going to all go to Russia? Is the plan that they stay there in some reduced form of citizenship? I mean, or, you know, this is one of the problems that I don't hear
the Banderas. The Banderas know what they're going to do, and they've been doing it.
Yeah.
Look at what happened in Izium. Look what happened in the Kharkov regions that were recaptured. Cleansing operations came in, filtering operations, they call them. They're slaughtering thousands of ethnic Russians. Anybody who was accused of supporting the Russian occupation is being killed, murdered on the spot. Women, men, children. That's the future of every ethnic Russian in the Donbass, in Zaporizhia, in Kherson, and in Crimea. So if you want Ukraine to win, what you're saying is you're going to tolerate the genocide of millions of ethnic Russians.
Yeah.
And
I don't see a way around that, unfortunately, right, which is why I can't.
But there's another thing attached to that should scare people even more. If you say you want Ukraine to win, that means you want them to take Crimea.
Yeah.
And if Ukraine was successful in taking Crimea, this constitutes an existential threat to Russia. And Russia has a nuclear doctrine that says they will use nuclear weapons to stop this. Now, those nuclear weapons will not be dropped on Ukraine because Russia has no intention of nuking a fellow Slav nation. Those nuclear weapons will be dropped on NATO, London, Paris, Berlin, Brussels, Rome, Madrid. Maybe some will make it their way to the United States. Some might make it their way to Canada. The world will end. So all of these people out there, you know, saying, we want Ukraine to win, you really are saying you want the world to end. You know, there's worse things in the world than accepting the fact that ethnic Russians will have a better life under a Russian government than they would under a Ukrainian government. Maybe when we talked again, maybe when Vladimir Putin talked about the history of development of Ukraine, he was spot on, that this is an artificial nation that has been cobbled together in a artificial manner and that they can't get along. How can you get along if you're a Western Ukrainian who views the ethnic Russians as subhumans, who has a history of slaughtering them in large numbers, and has proven that it's not just a historical thing that happened, but they're willing to do it now and are doing it now. So if you're anti-war, you might want to start thinking about being pro-partition. You might want to start thinking about the best way to end this war is on the terms that Russia is talking about, because that provides a long-term solution, because your solution only increases the death and destruction, the potential for the termination of all humanity.
Yeah. Well, we've unfortunate. You know what I think of from your history, Scott, is William Tecumseh Sherman. He made this speech when he burned Atlanta, or he wrote it, but he said something like, you know, a couple of years ago, if they had stopped, they would have had peace and harmony for 100 years. If they had stopped last year, they could have even kept their slaves. But now, you know, they're going to lose everything.
Over. And Ukraine's going to lose everything.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a sad fact. If you listen to Putin's February 21st speech that he gave, now in the West, it's been derided. You know, he's angry, he's bitter, he's vengeful.
Yes.
And also because he didn't announce the big aero offensive, it was a
nothing
burger. It was underwhelming. Yeah. Underwhelming. We weren't impressed. Listen to what he said, guys. First thing he said is the focus of effort is the economic and social revitalization of the new Russian territories. Mm-hmm. That means that, hey, the wars are going to stop until they push the Ukrainians out of these territories, and the focus is on building these territories up. Then he said, the nature of the weapons provided by NATO will define how far we have to push the Ukrainians back from these borders. And so when NATO is bragging about HIMARS and the small bomb units will go 150 kilometers, Ukraine, by accepting that weapon system, you just guaranteed that this war won't stop. And remember, Russia's winning, you're not. So this war won't stop until Russian forces have pushed 150 kilometers past the current borders of Novorossiya and Donetsk. And now we come to, I refer people back to Vladimir Putin's 2005 statement, not the one about the Soviet Union collapsing, but the one about he is responsible for all Russians, the Russian nation. If you go 150 kilometers past the Novorossiya and Donbass borders, you get Odessa, you get Dnipropetrovsk, you get Kharkov, Russian cities populated by majority Russian populations. Ukraine, you're going to lose everything. You are going to lose everything. And the West says they support you. Understand that the worst thing that ever happened to you, Ukraine, was buying into the promise, the false promise of NATO. because
who was it that said it's worse to be, it's bad to be
Kissinger.
America's enemy?
Kissinger. Yeah, and he would know.
Yeah, he sure would. So last question.
Okay.
Chinese peace plan. I guess the Biden already said if Putin likes it, it can't be good. So
Because
Biden,
Biden knows best.
Biden is, with his diplomatic acumen.
Surprised you didn't say, Vladdy boy.
Yeah,
Vladdy boy. That's why they get the big bucks and you don't.
Maybe it's dead in the water, but I mean, do you think, again, as an anti-war person, here I am, is there some formula with China mediating, or somebody that's credible that could have some kind of deal? Is there a deal that Russia could accept that could
the Russian deal has to, at this point in time? First of all, I have to be careful when I say has to, because I don't know.
Yeah.
What I do know is this, that the Russians articulated in phase one, demilitarization, denazification, and no NATO. By the time they got to the 1 April peace plan that there was going to be signed, they had walked away from demilitarization. They had walked away from denazification.
Yeah, the Israeli guy said that, right? The Israeli prime minister said.
And all they wanted was no NATO and independence for Donbass, and Crimea is forever Russia. Again, getting back to Tecumseh Sherman, had you stopped fighting 2 years ago, you could have had this. Had they stopped on 1 April, Ukraine would be a viable state, very strong, very healthy, and Russia would actually have more problems than Ukraine does because of the unsatisfactory nature of the peace. But they didn't do that. China is interesting because China and Russia, prior to the invasion, if you remember, Joe Biden, when he met with Vladimir Putin in June of 2021 in Geneva, on his way out, he turned to the press and without anybody provoking, he said, "Yeah, I don't want to give away too much about what I said to Vlad, but I told him, man, the Chinese, you got to get away from those boys. Those are bad boys. They're going to come in. They're trying to take over your economy. They're going to come in. You got Vlad, your bad move with the Chinese. You got to come to us, man. Come to us. Be with us. The Chinese are bad people." And Putin's like, "Thank you very much."
Well, there was another speech from a long time ago that's been making the rounds where Biden says, and then I told them, "What are you going to do? Go with China? Best of luck in your senior year."
and then, why don't you try Iran for that standpoint? Well, Joe, thank you.
Well, here we are.
Yeah, here we are. Iran, China, Russia together. But the thing is, Biden and not Biden, Putin and Xi Jinping have a very good relationship. Yeah. It's a relationship that has been formed consistently over the years. They're both very long-serving leaders. So it's not like the United States where every 48 years we get this whiplash of leadership and countries are going, "Who are you, Jekyll and Hyde?" Putin has been consistent for 22 years. Xi Jinping has been consistent for nearly the same amount of time. So this is a relationship born of trust and of necessity. China and Russia are not natural allies. They have been brought together because of the policies of the United States, which have been equally oppressive to both. So they've come together, they found common cause. It's an uncomfortable thing for the Russians to do, to commit economically to China, because China is big. There's a danger of China swallowing Russia.
China's so different, right? Russia loves the West. The Russians love the West. They always have.
Russia's learning to be indifferent to the West, because the West deserves to be indifferent too. Yeah. But Russia's changing. The things are changing. But here's China's problem. The whole key to China's policy towards Taiwan is an Westphalian approach to sovereignty, saying that Taiwan is China. There can be no interference in the internal affairs of China. West, you have to stay out of Taiwan. You can't get involved in Taiwan. That's our business. And Russia went and invaded Ukraine.
It's awkward.
Yeah, because we can't say we support you, because then we'd be supporting this. You've put us in a bind. What do we do? But before the invasion, Putin and Xi got together and they put out this 5,000-word joint statement that basically said, we are closer than allies. We have something better than alliances. And here's where it's important. Because it's true. Imagine a treaty that they had signed where China would have had to impose a Westphalian principle towards sovereignty, because that's China's national policy. And so now you have that treaty and Russia invades Ukraine. Suddenly the relationship is fatally flawed, fatally broken. You can't recover from that. But because there's no treaty, China is able to do the following. We don't really like what you're doing there, but we're not going to sanction you either. We oppose your invasion. We'd like you to get out, but we're going to open up gas pipelines and trading pipelines and the whole thing. So China's been doing this dance because it's not a treaty relationship. It's a relationship that's better than a treaty, and that proves it. But now China's in a situation where the West, they're looking at the West's strategic intent to destroy Russia, and they're saying, there before the grace of God go us. And if Russia fails, if Russia loses, then all of that intent is going to be turned on us, using Taiwan as the same leverage that Ukraine was used against Russia. So it's best that we enable Russia to win right now. So in order to walk away from Westphalian principles, you have to redefine the nature of the conflict away from a Russian-Ukrainian conflict into an existential struggle between Russia and the collective West. But before you can do that, you have to show good intent. You can't just walk away from Westphalian principles. You have to put
I see where you're going. I see. You're saying China's peace deal is insincere, I think.
I'm not saying it's insincere, because I think China would love it if Russia would unconditionally
but they
withdraw
also
from
know
Ukraine.
that it can't.
But that's not going to happen. It's not a lack of sincerity on the part of China's fault. They put forward a peace agreement that adheres to their principles of Westphalian sovereignty. But they also recognize that it's likely not to happen. And when it's rejected, then China will say that closes the door on issues of sovereignty, and it opens the door on a redefinition of the conflict along the lines of it's Russia's sovereignty that's now threatened by the collective West, that the West is using Ukraine as a proxy to take down Russia, and this is unacceptable because that's what the West is going to do with Taiwan against us. And now they are strategically aligning. There was that old movie, the Twilight movie, where you had a team,
the wolves and the
werewolves, and you had the vampires, and everybody said, my team Jacob or my team whomever. Well, China's basically saying we're Team Russia. They're putting on the Team Russia shirt. That doesn't mean that they support violations of sovereignty and all that, but they're saying that Russia must win this conflict. That the only way this war comes to an end is that Russia wins this conflict. Now, people are saying, well, that means China's going to provide ammunition. I don't agree. First of all,
Russia doesn't need it.
They don't need it. And they don't want it. Why? If this is an artillery-driven war, which it is, that means the fuel of your war engine is artillery ammunition. And if you want to turn up the heat against Ukraine, you put more fuel in, more ammo, you bang it out. If you need to drag it out, you lessen the fuel. But Russia's hand has to be on that throttle. If you give China the ability to supply the ammunition, China's hands on that throttle. And now I'm the Americans going, whoa, wait a minute. China now has control of this war. Hey, China, one China policy. We'd like to renegotiate that thing, but what we need you to do is crank down the ammo. Russia's not going to give control of the throttle to anybody. It's a Russian throttle, Russian war. Russia will hold on to it. So that's why I don't buy into this China giving Russia lethal aid.
So if we were an anti-war, let's see if we can agree. I know you. I think I understand your view. But if an anti-war movement were to have a slogan like, we need a deal that guarantees Russia's long-term security as well as, ends the war and ends the suffering. How about that? Could we have that as a slogan?
I don't know. Here's
I'm trying. Give me something.
Let me throw one at you.
Okay.
All right. What if we step back and get out of the weeds?
Okay.
Take a step back and look at the big picture. What's the biggest fear anybody has about this Russian United States
nuclear Armageddon?
Bingo. This is where we can get agreement, I believe, with everybody. Forget about peace deal, trying to get into the weeds and get involved, because you're not going to win on that one and anywhere. You might come up with an acceptable slogan for you, but the Russians don't care. That
I'll be holding that sign somewhere.
Yeah, and people will be driving by. Some will honk in favor, some will honk to harass you, and that's it. There's your day. There's your week.
I've done that. Yeah.
Who hasn't? Who hasn't? How about this slogan? No to nuclear apocalypse, yes to arms control.
Yeah.
You see, because right now there is no arms control.
Right.
Because of this war,
right,
there is a suspension of the last remaining strategic arms treaty between Russia and the United States. That treaty expires on February 2026. When it expires, there will be no arms control treaties. And because of the level of mistrust that currently exists between Russia and the United States today, this will inevitably lead to an arms race without any checks and balances in place. And because human nature is what it is, and the level of mistrust it is, it's not that there is a possibility of a miscalculation. It is a distinct probability, which means there will be a nuclear exchange and we all die. And this is the point I'm trying to get out to the anti-war movement right now. Yeah, this war is screwed up. Okay, I think we can all agree on that. This war is screwed up, and you may believe this, I may believe that, and we're not going to agree. But what we can agree is we don't want this war to turn into a nuclear apocalypse. So let's walk away from this war, right, and let's focus on the big picture. Because we ain't going to solve this war, it's going to solve itself. That's the tragic reality. Because the U.S. isn't going to stop providing arms, and the Russians aren't going to stop killing Ukrainians. And so this war will solve itself. What we need to focus on is getting Russians and Americans back together at the negotiating table. That's our number one priority. Not to tell them how the outcome should be. That's prescriptive and that doesn't work. I can tell you as an arms controller, but that you must sit down and start the business of talking now. It takes 3 to 5 years to negotiate an effective arms control agreement. We're not going to get that. At best, we're going to get some momentum post 2024 election and have 1 year, get a treaty done, which means you got to sit down in earnest and you have to mean it and it has to work. You get one shot at this. And that isn't going to happen if you have politicians and arms control experts who remain hostile to that notion. Yeah. They have to be empowered by the people in the same way that the Reagan administration, because remember, study the history of the Reagan administration. Early on, they did not like arms control. Richard Pearl and company were against it. Even Paul Nietzsche, the negotiator, wasn't too thrilled about it. Richard Burt, didn't like it. And in June of 1982, 1 million people gathered in Central Park and sent a message that we support arms control. Yes to arms control. And that liberated the politicians. And 5 years later, we got the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that then spilled over to the START Treaty, and we began a nice process that now has been reversed. So if people say, I'm anti-war, what can I do? I'm telling you right now, I'll give you a date. June 22nd, 2024. Join me and other people in Central Park or wherever you want to come up. Let's get millions of people to come out that day and send us a send-off. We're not protesting against anything. We're protesting for. We're demonstrating in support of arms control. Because if we don't solve that problem, all this other stuff doesn't matter. None of it matters. And now we come back to one of the original things we talked about. Can the left and the right come together? As an anti-war movement, probably not. Probably isn't going to happen. But as a pro-disarmament movement, to save the world, to save humanity, to save their children, to make it possible for their respective causes to have a chance to succeed in succeeding generations, even if you guys don't agree with one another now.
So we can keep fighting each other even.
Keep fighting each other, which is perfect in a democracy. That's what makes a democracy work. Right. But in order to give this imperfect democratic system a chance to live and thrive and work in all of its horrific irregularities, we have to be alive. So can we get together on the issue of arms control and send a signal to anybody running for office in the 2024 election that if you don't sign on to a litmus test, it's a simple one. Will you make arms control your number one policy objective if elected? Yes or no? I want you to commit right now. And if the answer is no, then all the millions of people say, we don't vote for you. Yeah. That's as simple. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat if you don't say that. Now, if you say yes, then we have an issue because if, let's say, a Democrat says yes, a Republican says yes, then the vote's going to split up and whoever else can do the other stuff. But you got to say yes. Right. Got to say yes to arms control. That is a movement I think we can get a lot of people to buy into.
Thank you, Scott. So if you're right, and this war is over in 6 to 8 months, we'll talk again then.
Go buy me a beer.
I'll buy you a beer, and also if you're wrong, then we'll probably
I'll buy you a beer.
Yeah, you'll buy me a beer, and we'll talk at the end of year 2.